Hello guys, and welcome to my lecture. Today we'll be talking about the very important case of Meridian Global Funds Management Asia Limited versus Securities Commission. It's a case in New Zealand, but the fact is very sweet, although complicated. So I would like you to, pay attention. So as I read out the fact, I'll try to explain it so that you will totally understand. Don't worry, you're not going to have a problem. Just try to understand as I teach and don't get distracted. So let us go to the facts. Now, Section 20, Sub 3 and 4 of the New Zealand Security Amendment Act requires everyone who becomes substantial security holder to give notice of his interest to the company and stock exchange as soon as he knew or ought to have known. Now, one thing we need to understand here is that we are talking about someone who has a substantial security. What is a security? That's shares and all those things. Where you have substantial security in a particular company, number one, you are supposed to give notice to that company that you are a substantial security holder. Then you are supposed to go to the SEC. The SEC is Nigeria's Securities Exchange Commission. But in New Zealand, it is called the Securities Commission. That's the Securities Commission of New Zealand. So you are supposed to go to the Securities Commission of New Zealand and then give a notice to them. Let them know that you have substantial security in a particular company. That is basically what this section is saying. Now, in 1990, a group of people in New Zealand, Malaysia, and Hong Kong tried to gain control of a cash-rich, publicly listed New Zealand company known as the Euro National Corporation Limited, ENC, and use its assets for their own purpose. The predators included a New Zealand businessman called David Lee Swan Moon, two Hong Kong investment managers called Norman Koo Hai Ching, also known as Koo, to be known as Koo in this case, and Norman Ng Wu Sui, to be known as NG in this case. I think it's not pronounced as NG, but I don't think I can see myself pronouncing it as Ng, so let us just say NG, who were employed by the appellant company Meridian Global Funds Asia Limited, to be known as Meridian in this case, and the members of Malaysian shareholding brokers firm Wang and Yusof Securities SDN BHD. All those aren't relevant. I want to explain what exactly this part is talking about. So there is a company that is publicly traded known as the ENC, and people were trying to get its shares because it is cash rich. As you can see in the description, it has money, so people were trying to get its shares. Now we have people like David Lee Swan Moon, who is a New Zealand businessman, and then we have Koo, KOO, and NG, who were employees of Meridian. Do you understand that? They were the investment managers of Meridian. Their scheme required the purchase through apparent respectable New Zealand merchant bankers of a 49% controlling holding in ENC. The intention was to fund the purchase out of ENC's own assets, but bridging finance was needed to fill the gap between buying shares and gaining control of the company's money. This was provided by Koo and NG out of the funds managed by Meridian. Meridian is a substantial Hong Kong investment management company, a subsidiary of National Mutual Life Assurance of Australia Limited. Koo was its investment chief officer, while NG a senior portfolio officer. Now, you can see from the fact that they wanted to buy ENC. And the first thing that you have to do is that you have to control the majority. By the time you are able to control the majority through the articles of the company, then you can then purchase or do anything that you want to do with the company. Because you are the majority have their way, while the minority have their say. That's basically, a company law slang. Now, in this case, we have two people, Koo and NG, who were employees of Meridian. They were the ones who made the investment. They did not buy those shares, 49%, to be substantial security holders. They did not buy it from their own money. They bought it from Meridian's own money. Are you listening? Now, the question before the court is whether the act and omission of Mr. Ku and NG, that's Mr. NG, were the act and omission of the company to render the company liable to statutory penalties. Now, when you are looking at something like this, the first question that comes to your mind is, are they the managing directors? No. Do they form the board? No. Are they the members in general meeting? No. Then it is going to be a rookie move to say that their act will not be regarded as the act of the company. So therefore, we have to look at what the trial court said. The trial court attributed the knowledge of K and N, that is Ku and NG, who undoubtedly knew all relevant facts, to being the act of the company. Now, Heron J held that Meridian knew on the 9th of November that it was a substantial security holder in ENC for the purpose of section 20 sub 4 sub E. He arrived at this conclusion by attributing to Meridian the knowledge of Ku and NG, who undoubtedly knew all the relevant facts. He did not go into judicial basis for this attribution in any details. It seems obvious to him that if Ku and NG had authority to enter the transaction, their knowledge should therefore be attributed to Meridians. It had therefore been in breach of its duty to give notice under section 20 sub 3. Now, the New Zealand Court of Appeal held that Mr. Ku's knowledge was attributable because he was the directing mind and will of the company. The Court of Appeal affirmed the decision of Heron J on somewhat different grounds. It decided that Ku's knowledge should be attributed to Meridian because he was the directing mind and will of the company. The Court of Appeal received some evidence about how Meridian functioned. The members of the board lived partly in Hong Kong and partly in Australia and met only once a year for the formal business before the annual general meeting. Other matters which required a board resolution were circulated by post. Ku used to be the managing director but was replaced by Mr. Amor on the 1st of August 1990. Although Ku thereafter, in theory, reported to Mr. Amor in the matter of buying and selling securities, he went on in the same way as before. The ENT purchases and sales were openly recorded in the books, but Ku did not specifically report to Mr. Amor, who only found out about them after Ku had left. Nor did Ku report anything else, and there was no evidence that Mr. Amor or other members of the board tried to supervise what he was doing. Now, coming from the perspective of the Court of Appeal, that's the New Zealand Court of Appeal, what they are trying to say is that we should attribute such act and liability to Mr. Ku, and we should also say that Mr. Ku is the directing mind and will of the company, because Mr. Ku, as we can see in this case, did not have anybody who was basically supervising him. The board of directors met only once a year, and any matter that required a resolution of the board was distributed, probably electronically. So if their meeting was done just once a year, it means that there needed to be somebody who would be in a position as to give responses to situations when things arise, and that used to be Mr. Ku. Mr. Ku used to be the managing director, but at a particular time, Mr. Amor succeeded him as managing director. But Mr. Amor did not supervise him, because on certain matters, Mr. Ku still acted without express supervision from Mr. Amor. And not just that, Mr. Ku also reported the purchase of ENC in the books. If Mr. Amor had looked at it, he would have seen that there was something that happened there. But Mr. Amor did not look at it. It means that Mr. Ku had power to not only make those purchases, as he was the chief investment officer, he also did not have any superior power that was watching him, and therefore his act was said, according to the New Zealand Court of Appeal, to be the act of the company. When the matter got to the Privy Court in England, Lord Hoffman held that it was a matter of construction to determine whether an employee's knowledge is to be imputed on the employer. The phrase directing mind and will comes, of course, from the celebrated speech of Viscount Haldane in the case of Leonard Carring Co. versus Asiatic Petroleum Co. Limited. But their lordships, that is, in this case, think that there has been some misunderstanding of the true principle upon which that case was decided. Now, I need everyone to now pay attention to what the court in this case, that's the Privy Council in this case, is saying. Because through this, you would be able to understand the rules of attribution as well as every other thing that is needed to understand when you are talking about act and liability of the company. This case seems to be one of the most important as it exposes us to a lot of things. Now, according to the court in this case, it stated that any proposition about a company necessarily involves a reference to a set of rules. A company exists because there is a rule, usually in a statute, which says that a personal ficta shall be deemed to exist and to have setting of the powers, rights, and duties of a natural person. But there would be little sense in deeming such a personal ficta to exist unless there are also rules to tell one what act we are to count as the act of the company, which is the personal ficta. It is therefore a necessary part of corporate personality that there should be rules by which acts are attributed to the company. This may be called the rules of attribution. The company's rules of attribution will generally be found in its constitution, typically the Articles of Association. And such Articles of Attribution would delineate powers to either the board of directors or the members in general meeting. There are also primary rules of attribution which are not expressly stated in the articles but implied in company law. These rules of attribution are obviously not enough to enable a company to go into the world and do business. Not every act of a company could be expected to be subject of a resolution of the board or a unanimous decision of the shareholders. The company therefore builds upon the primary rules of attribution by using general rules of attribution which are equally available to natural person, namely the principle of agency. It will appoint servants and agents whose acts by a combination of general principles of agency and the company's personal rules of attribution act as the act of the company. And having done so, it will also make itself subject to general rules by which liability for act of others can be attributed to natural persons, such as estoppel or ostensible authority in contract or vicarious liability in tort. It is worth pausing at this stage to make what seems to be an obvious point. Any statement about what a company has or has not done or can or cannot do is necessarily inference of the rule of attribution, either primary and general, as it applies to the company. You see, this seems to be quite straightforward. Right now, we are talking about the rules of attribution, like I told you. According to Lord Hoffman, in this case, that's the Meridian's case, the court basically taught us what the rules of attribution would be. Told us that there are two. We have the primary rules of attribution. Where do we find them? In the Articles of Association. And then we have the general. The general comes as a supplement to the primary, because the primary rules of attribution might not be able to encapsulate every situation that is going to happen. Because primarily, what the primary rules of attribution, which is the articles, will tell you is that the powers of the company are to be delineated between the members of the general meeting and the board of directors. But the general rules of attribution would then go further to tell you, which would include the principles of agency and then the rest. It will then go further to tell you that, yes, so we have the board of directors that have power to act. We also have the members in general meeting that also have power to act. However, where there has been a delegation of duties, either expressly or impliedly, so much so that it confers ostensible authority on this person, then this person will be deemed to have authority to act, and act not for the company but as the company. And that is basically what this rule is telling us. I would have loved to read the whole of the case, but don't worry, I have made my note available. My note is basically reporting the case in such a way that it is quite easy. You can go through it and totally understand it. But I wanted us to look at the dictum of Lord Hoffman in this case, and that is what I've presented to you. And that is the fact that we have primary rules of attribution and the general rules of attribution. The primary rules can be found in the articles, the general rules are the principles of agency and as well as the rest. So if you read my note, it will tell you that Professor Bolo Dieko stated that when discussing the directing mind and will of the company, we shouldn't limit our minds to only the general meeting or the board of directors and the managing director. Reason being that this directing mind can also appoint officers or agents to carry out their work as directing mind and will of the company, and their act shall bind the company. It should be noted that it is not every servant that does the thing. Whatever the servants do will not be regarded as the act of the company. No, don't be misguided to believe that. But then, just like we looked at this Meridian's case, you would see from the Court of Appeal decision, there was no authority, no overhauling authority over Mr. Ko in this case. Mr. Ko was the chief investment officer, which means that Mr. Ko could have done anything on behalf of the company as regards that specific matter. If it was another thing that he did, his act might likely not be the act of the company. He was given the power to be chief investment officer. What he did in this case was make investment with the company's money. There was no supervisor, although yes, Mr. Amor, who was the managing director, was supposed to directly supervise him, but he wrote it in the books. Mr. Amor basically gave him the free will to do whatever he wanted to do, and it was on that note that the court then had to decide that who can we then say, as regards the investment of this company, can we say is the directing mind of the company? That is the reason they held Mr. Ko and Mr. NG to be the directing mind, not in everything that the company did, but on that particular subject matter of investment, because Mr. Ko had the power, and not just that, because there was no overhauling supervision, so to say, upon him. If we go to Leonard's case as well, you would see that it's almost the same principle is applicable as rule of attribution, because according to the primary rule of attribution, Mr. Leonard has the power. In this case too, according to the primary rule of attribution, which is the articles, Mr. Ko had the power. Therefore, where the primary rule of attribution already gave you the power to do so, except that primary rule of attribution does not give you the power to do so. If the primary rule has already given you the power has been set out there and you have been enabled to do that particular thing, then the general rule of attribution, which will be the rule of agency, would then apply, so much so that your act will be regarded as the act of the company, which is your principal, in this case the company. Do you understand what I'm saying? I'm very sure that you guys already have a very substantial knowledge on this, but I will advise you, please go through my notes, read the case, so that you can be abreast of not just the fact but the judgment and the rationale for the judgment. Now we are going to the next case, which is the Lady Gwendolyn's case. I also love that case. After that, we have Tesco and Natres, we have Early and Lifa, before we end this particular section. So see you in my next lecture.